Hi, and welcome back to this week's Parsha share on Sefer Netivot Shalom. Towards the beginning of Parsha's Vaera, we learn about what becomes known as the Arba Lashonos Geula, the four expressions of redemption that Hashem gives to Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Torah says, "L'chen hamor livnei Yisrael," you should tell the Jewish people, "Ani Hashem ve'hotzeiti etchem mitachat tzivlot Mitzrayim." 1. Vehitzalti etchem me'avodasam. 2. Vega'alti eschem b'zrua netivah. 3. ולקחתי אתכם לי לעם והייתי לכם לאלוקים וידעתם כי אני השם אלוקיכם להוציא אתכם מתחת מצרים. 4 expressions of redemption, which becomes why we have 4 kosos, 4 cups of wine at the Seder, etc., many other ramifications of that. And the Netivot Shalom says we have to look more carefully at the language of the Arba Lashonos Geula. Yesh l'daktik b'psukim elu kfelus halashon. We have to pay attention to a double language, to the redundancy in the language of the Arba Lashonos Geula. In the first language of redemption, when God talks about taking us out of bondage, He says, "I'm going to take you out of Sivlos Mitzrayim," the suffering of Egypt. And then it goes on to number 2, number 3, number 4, and then the capstone of this whole section is V'yidatem. And through these 4 methods of redemption, you will know Ki ani Hashem Elokechem, that I am the Lord your God, Hamotzi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim, who takes you out of the suffering of Egypt. So he says here, why is there a double mention of Sivlos Mitzrayim? And why is it specifically connected to the word lahotzi, to take out? And then in the end, you'll know that I'm the God who is hamotzi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim. The hotzi and motzi are from the same word, lahotzi, to take you out. Why is there a double emphasis here in the passage of taking us out of sivlos Mitzrayim? What is the meaning of sivlos Mitzrayim, and why is it repeated twice? And thirdly, why is it connected to the word lahotzi? Another way of stating this question is, why is the expression of taking us out of Sivlos Mitzrayim applied only to the first language of redemption, of Vehotzeiti, as opposed to Vehitzalti, Vegalti, Velakachti? Why isn't that expression of Sivlos Mitzrayim mentioned the other times as well? He says, Etzem Pirush Sivlos Mitzrayim Yesh Lefarish. He says we have to really understand what is the meaning of Sivlos Mitzrayim. That will open up for us the answer to all of these questions. Dekan Pirush Rashi Torach Masa Mitzrayim. Rashi here at the beginning of Vaera says that what Sivlos Mitzrayim is, the suffering of Egypt, it's Torach Masa Mitzrayim. It's the burden and the extreme effort that we had to exert over our labors in Egypt. However, he says, but Parsha HaKodemes, in last week's Parsha, when the Pasuk says, Vayomer lemelech Mitzrayim, Lama Moshe ve'Aaron tafriu es ha'am ma'asav, lechu lisivlosechem. When Paro gets upset that Moshe and Aaron are interfering with the work of the nation, he tells them, lechu, go back, lisivlosechem. The same word, sivlos, sevel, suffering. Same word is expressed over there. In that context, Rashi says, lechu, not letorach masa Mitzrayim, to the burden and the toil of the effort of Egyptian labor, but rather lechu lemelachtechem sheyesh lechem lasos bebasechem. Go back, says Paro to Moshe and Aaron, and do the work that you have to do in your homes. Aval melech hashibud Mitzrayim lo hayta al shifto shel Levi. But he obviously wasn't telling them to go back to Sevel, to the suffering that the rest of the nation was enduring, because after all, the tribe of Levi was not enslaved, and Moshe and Aaron are both from the tribe of Levi. V'im simlosechem, says Netivot Shalom, if sevel, sivlosechem, you're suffering, kolo gam melechas habayis, madua sivlos Mitzrayim misparish lachshon torach masa Mitzrayim, hay melechas ha'adam veso en lo torach masa. He says, if it's true that the word sevel, sivlosechem, includes work in your home and work in the field and other kinds of work, sevel here is not suffering, but just work, as in last week's Parsha, Rashi indicated by the Moshe and Aaron example, then why over here in our Parsha does Rashi interpret sivlosechem, as being Torach Masa Mitzrayim, the difficult effort, burdensome labor of Egypt, when not all the labor included in the definition of Seva is really so burdensome. When you do malacha in your house, when you work around your house, you take care of your responsibilities, it may be difficult, it may require time and effort, but it's not the same as Torach Masa Mitzrayim. So what exactly is the meaning of Seva? Achain, he says, can answer all of these questions by analyzing this concept further. כל עניינה של גלוס מצרים, הרי היה הכנה ל"ולקחתי אתכם לי לעם והייתי לכם לאלוקים שישראל יהיו לעם הנבחר." The whole purpose of suffering in Egypt was ultimately so that we could rise from it to become God's chosen nation, the fourth of the language of redemption. "לקחתי אתכם לי לעם," I will take you to be my nation, we will be the chosen people. והיא הייתה הכנה לקבלת התורה, which in essence is a preparation, not just for becoming God's people. What does it mean to become God's people? It means to accept the Torah. Uli Rusha Sa'aretz, and to inherit the land. Ulechol hamadregos haramo sham Yisrael yamiyuad lahagia, and all the high levels that we were supposed to reach as a people, especially Matan Torah and the land and all of those things. So he says, Hagalus haita b'chinas he'eder shekadam letzmicha shel Am Yisrael. If you look at the line of Jewish history, the suffering in Egypt was really meant to be the downfall before the rise, before the sprouting, before the blossoming of our people. Ke'inyan hakasuv, just like the Torah says, Vahi erev, Vahi boker. In the story of creation, night always comes before day. And what that means is kodem chashucha v'hadar nahura. That first you have to have darkness, and then you emerge into the light. It's only when you come from the place of darkness that you can truly appreciate where you've come from and truly appreciate your growth and your expansion. Mitchila avru Yisrael sachashchus shel galus Mitzrayim v'achar kach nihiyu la'am hanivchar v'higiu lekabalas haTorah lirushas haaretz. First, we have to go through the darkness of slavery in Egypt, and only then could we emerge to the greater levels of Kabbalas haTorah and inheriting the land and becoming the Am Hanivchar. Because this represented the moment of the birth for our nation, the suffering and the depth of darkness into Egypt had to be worse than any other exile we would endure in our future. It was the worst of the worst. The way Chazal constantly express the depth of how bad it was over there is that they say we reached the 49th level of Tumah. Did we really reach the 49th level of Tumah? Did every single Jew in Mitzrayim reach the 49th level of Tumah? What exactly does 49th level of Tumah mean? I don't know. But what that code word represents, 49th level of Tumah, means they got to rock bottom. They got to the worst of the worst. The Galus of Mitzrayim has sucked them to the lowest point of humanity, the lowest point possible. And that was purposeful, because it's only from there that we could truly emerge to the greatest heights, that we could have our tzmicha, we could have our flourishing, our blossoming, our growth into the special nation we were meant to become. This is already hinted to in the Brisbane Habasarim when Hashem says to Avraham Avinu that one day in the future your children are going to go down to Egypt, and over there in Egypt, va'avadum ve'inuotam. They're going to be enslaved and they're going to suffer. What are these two expressions? Va'avadum, they'll cause them to work, avoda, ve'inuotam, and they'll cause them to suffer. He says, beis mine yisurim. What Abraham's vision or prophecy was foreshadowing was two forms of suffering in Egypt. Va'avadum, hainu hayisurim, hagashmim shisavlu Yisrael sham. Va'avadum represents the physical suffering the Jewish people would endure in Egypt. And the inuotam represents the spiritual suffering that they would endure in Egypt. And both were the worst of the worst. The Egyptians represented Mekor Hazuama Shel Ha'olam. They represented the worst evil of the world, the most tumah, the most impurity, the most defilement. We went down into Egypt and contracted all 49 levels of that tumah. The physical suffering was the worst. The spiritual depths of suffering was the worst, which is why, by the way, the Torah warns us, K'ma'aseh Mitzrayim lo ta'asun. When it gives a frame of reference for the ways of idolatry and tumah that we should not follow, it gives the example of Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim represents the epitome of tumah, the epitome of all we're supposed to strive to disconnect from. The B'shar HaGaluyos lo Yisrael meshubadim. In the other exiles that we unfortunately have gone through in the course of Jewish history, we were never mishubad. We were never enslaved, quote unquote, in the way that our enslavement is described in Egypt. We worked for the nations who enslaved us, who controlled us, who ruled over us, because they were stronger than us and they ruled over us. We had to work for them, we had to serve them. But it wasn't a soul enslavement. It wasn't an enslavement of our very beings. Loken galus Mitzrayim hanikres beis avadim. The only exile that's called beis avadim, the house of enslavement. It represents the depths of enslavement, is Egypt. It was at a different level than the rest of the exiles, because sham hayu mishubadim legamre. Because in Egypt, it really was a bias. Bias represents total, all-encompassing experience, consuming experience. Egypt was the consuming experience of shibud, of slavery, because A, it was physical and spiritual, and B, it was the worst of the physical and the worst of the spiritual. The other exiles, we had, some spiritual suffering, such in Hanukkah's story. We had physical suffering, such as in the Purim story. We had various sufferings. Most of the time it was not both, and most of the time it was not in the depth of what it was in Egypt, where it was an all-consuming pull that kept bringing us downward and downward until that quote-unquote code word 49th level of Tumah, where HaMachshava, HaMoach, the Halev, where our thoughts and our mind and our heart and our emotion and our psychology and our identity and our being, Hakol Haya Meshubad, all of it was enslaved, Letumas Mitzrayim Bezu Hamasa, to the impurities of Egypt and the evil that went on there. If we understand that frame of reference, of what Egypt represented, what the slavery of Egypt represented, we can now come to start to answer some of our questions. Zeu inyan sivlos Mitzrayim, Torach Masa Mitzrayim, Shehi Haita Hagalus Akasha Biyoser. The reason why Rashi translates Sivlos Mitzrayim, the suffering of Egypt in our Parsha, as Torach Masa Mitzrayim, the incredible, difficult, burdensome labor of Egypt, because it really was. It was the worst of the worst. Shahaita hein begashmius hen beruchnis, because it permeated the physical and the spiritual. Shayu meshubadim legamrin the Mitzrayim meshukalim kalil betumasa v'zumamasa. We were completely consumed by the impurities. V'zeh gama shamar para lama Moshe v'Aaron tafriu asam ma'asav lechu l'sivlosechem. Now we can understand why, even though Sivlosechem represents Torach Masa Mitzrayim, when Paro in last week's Parsha sends Moshe and Aaron home, and Rashi says, when Paro tells them, Lechu lesivlosechem, go to your sevel, to your suffering, he was telling them, go home to your malacha in your homes. And we said before, we don't understand how, if sevel represents Torach Masa, the terrible enslavement of Egypt, how does that fit with the fact that Rashi says in the previous Parsha that when Paro sends them to their sevel, he was not sending them to terrible labor in the fields, terrible suffering and slavery, he was sending them to the malacha of their homes. Netivot Shalom says this is what it means. Torach Masa Mitzrayim, as Rashi says in our Parsha, is sevel because it was so bad physically and spiritually that it permeated every aspect of life. So even though in last week's Parsha, Paro was only sending them back to their homes, to work in their homes, as opposed to working in the field, they were still touched by Sivlosechem. They were still touched by Torach Masa Mitzrayim, the depth of the suffering of the labors of Egypt, the burdensomeness of it, because it touched everything. Every piece of their being, of their character, their identity, spiritually and physically, was touched by this enslavement of Egypt. That's how bad it was. So even though they were only going home to their homes to work over there, it still was a form of sevel. It was a form of the same Torach Masa Mitzrayim, even though they weren't working in the fields like the rest of the Jewish people. It was the same equatable form of slavery, because even in their homes, they were affected by the tumah. They were affected by the impurities, and therefore it's included in that. Hasevel haruchani shu ikar hagalus v'koshi hashibud b'Mitzrayim, because in their homes they also felt the spiritual suffering, which was the essence of the depth of how bad this exile was in Egypt. Netivot Shalom says, now we understand perhaps why the words Sivlos Mitzrayim are used specifically twice in the passage of the Arba Lashonos Geula, and both times with the word Vehotsesi. Vehotsesi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim, and then in the end, V'yadatem ki ani Hashem Elokechem hamotzi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim. He says, because that depth of spiritual and physical, but mainly spiritual suffering of the Memtet Sharei Tuma could only have been something that we emerged out of, and that we got out of, and that we were freed from by God Himself literally coming and plucking us out. So, of course, it mentions it in the context of Hotzesias. God says, I'm going to take you out of there. I'm not going to take you out of Egypt. I'm going to take you out of the Shibud. I'm going to free you from the shackles and the harness of the suffering of Egypt that totally consumes you and pulls you down. And once you're freed from that, once I take you out of that, then v'ga'alti etchem, then I'm going to redeem you. V'yitzalti etchem, I'm going to save you, meaning I'm going to take you out of this place of Egypt. V'lakachti etchem, and I'm going to take you to be my nation. And in the end of the day, how are you going to know that I'm truly God? V'yidatem ki ani Hashem Elokechem hamotzi eschem mitachas sivos Mitzrayim. You're going to know I'm God at the moment when I extract you, because you're so far gone and so deep that you are disconnected from God. But when God comes, so to speak, with His hand and takes you out of Egypt, hamotzi eschem, takes you out of that shibud, out of that torah masa Mitzrayim, out of that burdensome physical and spiritual suffering, and releases you from those memtet sharei tuma, you'll suddenly feel the presence of God again, and you'll know ki ani Hashem Elokechem. You'll know that the only reason you got out of it is because of your eternal connection with God. Because you're connected with God, God had the anchor to come and pull you out. And once you were freed from that mindset, from that burdensome, all-consuming experience of physical and spiritual suffering, then you'll be in a place where you can be redeemed. So now we understand all of our questions. We understand why the passage of Sivlos Mitzrayim is repeated twice in the Arba Lashonos Geula. We understand why it's connected specifically to the verb lehotzi, to take you out. And we understand the discrepancy between the way Rashi defines Sevel here in our Parsha and Rashi defines Sevel in the previous Parsha when Moshe and Aaron are sent home. The message emerges much further than the suffering of Egypt. Message number one of this incredible passage in Netivot Shalom is the message of Kodem Chashucha V'Hadar Nehura, that we always have to start in a place of darkness and then emerge to greater light. Whether the darkness is all-consuming and complete, or the darkness is just a hint of a shadow, we're always in life emerging from darker places into more light. And that's our goal in life, to continue to strive, to raise ourselves up, to add more and more light to our being, to our spirit, to our neshama, and to the world around us. Lesson number one. Lesson number two, we all go to rock bottom sometimes, like the Jewish people as a whole did in Egypt. We all go into spiritual and physical exile sometimes, to the lowest of places, to the Memtet Sharei Tuma. Not as a nation, that was only in Egypt, but as individuals, we sometimes go there. And the only thing that will get us out is our eternal connection with Hashem. So long as we remain connected to Hashem, and even in the Memtet Sharei Tuma, Hashem will have an anchor to pull us out, to grab us, to snap us out of our trance of being so low and so captured by that Tuma, that we will realize who we are and begin to emerge from that darkness into the light. And once we change our perspective, once we see it differently, then we can go shlav achar shlav, stage after stage, into the stage of redemption and into the state of being this step of being saved, and ultimately into the final step of becoming truly God's nation, connected with God and aware of God. Vidatem ki ani Hashem Elokechem. Shabbat shalom.